welcome to my camp, brought to you by Happy Camper Live, and our special series called My Camp Lives On. And this series of podcasts is dedicated to camps that are no longer operating, but the influence and the memories of these very special places live on in the lives of former staff and former campers. Tonight, we will be featuring Camp Kennebec. Camp Kennebec was a real legend of in New England of all boys camps. And so I'm going to ask my guests to introduce themselves individually and what their connection was to Kennebec, and we're going to share some great memories.
I'll go first. I'm the oldest, I suppose. My name is Dan Rosenberg. I grew up in Cincinnati, Ohio. I was going to end up in Wisconsin going to camp until my mother, who went to school with Hart Stodder's wife, Jean Stodder, former owner of Camp Kennebec, decided that I should go to Maine, and it changed my life. I was a camper at Kennebec Junior in 1964 and was a camper at Kennebec Senior or Camp Kennebec from 65 to 68. And then I worked at the camp for 5 years through the summer of 1973.
Nice. Andrew?
Shall I go?
Sure. Andrew.
I'll go then. So hi, I'm Andrew Kerwin from New York, grew up on Long Island, and I was the second Kerwin son to go to Kennebec. My older brother Glenn went to Kennebec for 3 years. And then I started in 1977. I did 2 years at Kennebec Junior. And then I spent 4 years at Kennebec Senior. While I wanted to come back as a counselor, that did not work out with my negotiations with the owner of the camp in approximately 1986 or so. So I always wanted to do that, and
There's got to be a story there, because we know former campers get paid $400 for the summer. That's the way it goes. Take it or leave it, baby.
No, it wasn't truthfully, it was not had nothing to do with money. It had to do with if you understood, well, so Kennebec, as we mentioned there's a junior camp and a senior camp. So the junior camp was on one side of the lake and the senior camp was on the other side of the lake. And from watching, the experience of the counselors at the senior camp was far greater than working with the young kids. So I only wanted to go to senior camp, and the owner of the camp at that time only wanted to put me at the junior camp.
Got it.
So that was really what that was about.
Don, can you introduce yourself and tell us your connection?
Okay, I'm Don Clark. I kind of have a unique connection because I grew up 2 miles from the campus. My dad was a counselor there for 30 years. And so I got to go through the generosity of the owners for free. Fantastic experience. Everybody was cordial. Obviously a Jewish camp, but I never heard one dissenting word. Everybody accepted me. It was fantastic. Really changed my life. A little hick from the woods, got exposed to some incredible, fantastic people. I was there in the late 60s, became a counselor in 70, and I was there 8 years as a counselor. Fantastic time. That's how Dan and I know each other. And we had a good time together. It was a fantastic camp. We'll get into that, I'm sure, further on, as to why. But that's me, and I'm actually back here in North Belgrade. I live probably 2 miles from the original campus.
Wow.
So yeah, it's pretty neat.
That's very, very cool.
Yeah, it is cool.
So we are going to get into all that stuff, but I'd love one of you, the one that whoever thinks they give a brief history, 2 minutes of what you know the camp from its beginning until they close their doors.
Dan, do you want to share the early stuff, and I'll do a little bit too?
I'll do my best, and obviously Don pick up, and Andrew, who was there later than
Andrew was later.
You and I, than you and I, Don. The camp was formed in 1907 by Philadelphians who I think we were motivated by giving young men, young boys who were privileged upbringings and had a soft upbringing, sort of the woods experience and the roughing it experience. And I think when we visited other camps, they were surprised to find out we lived in tents over platforms and cabins without electricity or running water, any of that, and spent July competing and August in the woods. And there were several founders of the camp, all connected to Philadelphia. Lou Fleisher, the one I know the most, because he was alive when Don and I went to camp, and he was an Olympian. And there were a lot of traditions. And part of the tradition was that campers and counselors, Jewish and Gentile, all commingled. And Don made a remark about that before, but I can remember when one of the team captains, we were divided into maroon and gray for the entire summer and in friendly competition. And one year I was there, the maroon captain was a Jewish civilian, if you will, from Philadelphia, and the gray captain was the other captain was the son of a counselor. So we all commingled. It was sort of secular in the sense that in junior camp and senior camp, we got together on Sunday evenings for a quiet hour and reflection and more of a somber evening activity as opposed to movies and other kind of evening activities. And the ownership eventually came to Harry Myers and Hart Stoddard. Harry ran junior and Hart ran senior. And then Tom Wilson came on the scene, and Dan Alexander were two of the directors in our era. And I would sort of pass it off to Don and Andrew to sort of fill in the rest of the ownership story.
Well, I don't know about the ownership. It was Bernie Lemonick after that. I guess what I'd like to touch on is what Dan mentioned. We had color war, and probably the second day we were there as campers, the two captains that had been chosen the year before chose everybody to be on their team. Half the camp was maroon, half was gray. So your tent mate might be your opponent at some point, even though he was your best friend, on the other team. So it made it very interesting, and it was all consuming. I mean, everything we did was points related. There was softball every evening, baseball. We had track on Saturday. Remember swimming on Sunday? It always rained. Dan will remember that. It was almost over the top competition. And then the second half of the season for us was trip season. And the youngest group, the Pioneers, went to Tumbledown for a week. The second year group went to Katahdin for a week. The third year group went on Moose River, and then later a sailing trip for about 11 days. The oldest group, which you'll find out was called the first section, we were gone for 18 days on the Allagash and St. John River. And you were in the woods.
This is back in the day when camps were 8 weeks, 56.
8
full
weeks,
days.
exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
There's no such thing that doesn't exist anymore.
I know.
7 weeks is the longest. Andrew, explain to our audience a little bit about the junior camp, senior camp.
Yeah, I was
setup.
going to touch upon that. Dan,
Yeah, that's
Dan
good.
started talking about sort of the history, and I believe that, and I did talk to people because I was trying 2 different times to what I call resurrect the camp. That failed, unfortunately. The camp, started all the way back in 1907. And back in those days, there really was not a lot of outlets for Jewish children to get away from the cities. And many, that was still a time when many most of the Jewish populations were in the cities, and it was hard to get away to the countryside. And when you went to the countryside somewhere, it was hard. There was beliefs, of anti-Semitism, but there was also, they wanted to be together. So they found this beautiful spot in North Belgrade, Maine, and land was, I guess, extremely cheap because they bought I don't know how many thousands of feet of waterfront on the one side of the lake where they developed the junior camp. And then on the other side, it was maybe what about a 15-acre spot?
I think it
for
was around 22,
22 acres.
roughly. Yeah.
And they designed two separate and unique programs. And I think that was truly, looking back on it, one of the great reasons for the success. So you had the young kids on one side of the lake, starting anywhere from maybe 8 years old up through 11 years old. Maybe I turned 12 my last summer at junior camp. And, they designed this with, I think, competition and learning to expand your horizons literally from day one. So at the junior camp, you were divided into, it was based upon the Abenaki Nation tribes. I don't know if that could still be done anymore, but you were in a tribe. There were typically 4, maybe 5 tribes. There, when at its capacity, there was maybe about 120 kids, and you would spend up to 3 years at the junior camp. And you would compete as your tribe against the other tribes, also from day one. When you were there in baseball, in basketball, soccer, swimming, but it was designed around, you learned how to swim at junior camp. They from day one, they saw what you could do, and then they had this sort of pecking order of different levels you could make in swimming. And they also designed it to have, at least in my day, sort of extra rights you would get at the waterfront as you progress through the different levels. And the first major level there was you would make it to Big Bertha, which was a World War II era pontoon bridge. And if I believe you had to be, the level was bass to make that. It started with trout, and I forget the different minnow. I think minnow was the lowest.
Minnow was a low one.
The lowest of low was the sinker. They had something called the sinker's crib, and it was kind of designed to make you maybe be a little bit embarrassed because you were in the sinker's crib, and then you would get out of that. You would push yourself to get out of that if you were that. I came and you had to swim, and they toughened you up. So to get on Big Bertha, you had to start at one end, and you had to fight your way through the kids who'd already made it. And if you made it to the other end, you could stay on Big Bertha. And it was a lot of fun if you got pushed off or back on. And I remember making it my first summer and plowing through, and then you got to stay. And if you made it past that, we had salmon float, and then you had trout. I think it was trout float.
Muskie.
So that, and also they had on the waterfront out, you took what seemed like a pretty extensive hike, but really wasn't, but as an 8 or 9 year old, you would go out to what we call the reservations or the res.
Yes.
And each tribe had their own separate camp area with waterfront to go swimming, and you would go out there 2 or 3 times a summer for 2 or 3 days, and then you would have a trip. So they start at the early age teaching you to swim, and also, the outdoor skills of enjoying being around the campfire, learning how to build a campfire and cooking outdoors, and also the competition, learning to harden yourself. I mean, it's remarkable how the competition of sports and the color war, which was started at such an early age.
So were there only one gray and one maroon for the whole camp, or lower junior camp? And
No, there were 5 tribes with different colors at the junior camp. When you got to senior camp, it switched to maroon and gray.
Got it.
Right.
But
And how many dining rooms did the camp have?
what's that?
How many dining rooms did the camp have?
Well, each side had its own dining room.
So really,
Each
when you're
camp
in
had its
junior
own dining
camp-
room.
So when you're in junior camp, you are very separate.
Oh yeah, it's the other side of the lake.
And what if you had a brother? How often would you get to see your brother if they were in upper camp?
Maybe twice.
All summer.
Yeah, then it was meant to be separate. If with the senior, actually maybe a little bit more than that, because if you wanted to, the senior campers, certain nights were allowed to paddle across the lake and visit.
So I don't care how hard they made you. Let's be honest with each other here. How brutal It was that swim test, the first couple of days at camp, when it felt like the lake had just thawed out from the winter. I mean, come on, guys, northern Maine.
In early July, as a 9-10-year-old, it was
Late
cold.
June, Andrew, late June. That was
Late
brutal.
June.
Yeah.
We had a lot of interesting competitive traditions. I think there were two things that struck me is
Should we tell them about Dip Club?
well, that's where I was going. We had a thing called Dip Club, and rain or shine, you took a dip first thing in the morning. And if you made it through the entire year, all 55 or 56 days, whatever it was, you were awarded a tiny little pennant that might have been 3 inches long that said Camp Kennebec on it. But it was so much more than that. It was just sort of a spirit thing. I also want to make a note about competition. Over the years, people have said, oh, Kennebec was a real competitive camp. And I think, yeah, sports were important for character building, as Don and Andrew just mentioned. But everyone participated in every sport. It was not like the best athletes got to do everything. On Saturdays, everyone ran track. Everyone had to run the 110, the 220, the 440, the marathon, or the endurance run, whatever it was. Everyone had to swim. That may have been, as Don said, on Sundays, you had to swim the 50, the 100, the whatever. Everyone had to do everything.
Hey, Dan.
And yeah. Oh, thank you. Don is holding up a picture of my reward for being in Dip Club for 3 of the 4 years.
No, 1 year.
You guys are going to love it.
He's talking about senior camp again. You know,
That's
correct.
most of our memories of a lot of these more outward or more come from the senior camp, where you got to really expand your horizons more. But you know, junior camp was very regimented. But they trained you had to take the tennis lessons, you had to do baseball, you had to do the swimming, you had to do sailing, you started, and they build you up. And we didn't even talk about the war canoes.
Right.
So every tribe had a massive 22-person war canoe, as we called it. And you trained for the first month to visiting day, when the parents came for the big race. And you would, any sunny, almost every good weather day, as long as it wasn't raining, they put you out on the lake before, usually before lunch, for a half-hour training period. And that was an eye-opener to watch, these young kids start learning to paddle in sequence. And it was a huge deal when the parents came and you had the 4 or 5 war canoes out on Salmon Lake. And my dad used to comment with the 3, I had 2 brothers that went, a younger brother and older brother, that when he would come on that day, he was always amazed at the muscles that had formed in us. We were not the most fit, in that manner. And then he looks at us and cannot believe that I've got biceps. That was a real subtle, way of getting kids into, better shape and getting stronger and growing. And then, we had what they call compulsory swim at junior camp, but then it turned into morning dip at senior camp. Although sometimes, I don't know, this certainly probably wouldn't go on anywhere else, but the morning dip was a skinny dip for, and they would get you up, and because many of the kids didn't shower, and I think this was designed to get kids remotely clean. And they would get you out on the dock, and you swam 25 yards across. You got out, you quickly put your towel on. And every so often, some of the folks on the lake, you'd see somebody out in a canoe at 7:30 or whatever in the morning to take a peek, because it was quite an event.
The camp that I grew up at, after Belgrade, had a dippy club as well. And just so you know, right, we're now in 2023, and at my camp, which is a brother-sister camp, we have the Polar Bear Club, and it's exactly the same, except the girls go to the girls' waterfront, and the boys go to the boys' waterfront in bathing suits.
Right.
You got to jump in the water and get out, and if you miss one day, you're out of the club.
Right.
So you'll be happy to know
That's good to
some
hear.
of the traditions that you guys remember is exactly what today's camp directors, who all grew up in that era, are still doing, so because, you know, where else do you get to do things like that except camp?
Yeah, that's cool.
So I remember playing intercamp and having a meal at Kennebec. So tell our audience what you call your counselors and where did that come from? You didn't call them their names.
No,
No, they were Uncle Bob and Uncle Steve and Uncle
Yep.
Artie Clark, Don's
Yep.
dad.
So tell me where'd that come from? Do you know?
Dan, I don't know.
I was thinking about
I
that
think it
today.
goes way, way back because I've read stuff from the 1920s and they refer to them as uncle.
You know,
And-
there is a tradition within certain realms of Judaism where you call a close family friend an uncle,
Oh,
right? Even though they're not a blood uncle and aunt, and there's a sign of respect from that. And I have a feeling that that's where it came from, but it's absolutely meant to be a sign of respect, and family, and for so many
good point.
of counselors, they were family. They were Kennebec. Don's father is Kennebec. And unlike, and when I did my research about other camps, when I was trying to put together the group to buy back and start Kennebec up again, one of the unique aspects of Kennebec was their ratio of educator counselors to campers. At the junior camp, it really was one for every tribe of anywhere from 18 to 20, you know, 50, maybe 15. There was a school teacher who was running that group, and would have, you know, 3 or 4 other uncles assisting him to run that group. And you didn't find that in a lot of other camps. Plus, there were usually 2 or 3 or 4 other, you know, higher level educator counselors at certainly at junior camp, and then you go over to senior camp, and there's this bevy of guys who have been there 15 years, 20 years, 30 years, and some genius at some point in the line, they you know, they had another stretch of land, and they built something called the Colony, which were cabins and cottages on the lake for these school teachers to bring up their families and have their wife and children on the lake, you know, and that lured them back year after year. And this, you know, I don't know, was maybe 15, 20 counselors year after year. They were the backbone of the camp, and we had great respect for them, and they were our uncles. And they loved coming back.
There was this really strong presence, you know, we mentioned Don's father, Uncle Artie, and the family still live around the lake today. One of the founders, Charles Fox, his wife lived there, and I met her many years ago, and her daughter, Frances Fox Samuel, actually wrote a history of Camp Kennebec. And there's lots of families that live around the lake today. But I think, to me, we've talked about the counselors coming from educational institutions, but as Andrew said, it was the longevity and the consistency year after year. We had former campers. Yeah, I came back as long as I could until I ended up going into the workforce. But there were a lot of campers that did that. So you had a certain consistency, and it didn't feel like you were getting a fresh crop of counselors from Europe that needed a summer job, so to speak, and with a lot of turnover. You had an incredible consistency. So today, Don and I communicate with all sorts of campers and counselors in our approximate age group, and I assume, Andrew, you do the same thing too. So it's
plus others. I mean, I've had the great pleasure of meeting Don through my my search for the windmills, my quixotic search of you know, to buy Kennebec. That's how I met him. And I this summer I came up, and he took me to see the old uncles still living on the lake. We had a wonderful time out on the lake. And yes, I've got lots of friends. You know, we have these reunions still.
Wait.
And we, you know, it's amazing that the camp's been closed really since 1991, and every 5 years we're still doing it. I'm sure.
But Andrew, what's interesting about you and trying to cobble together a group of people to resurrect the camp. That's a recurring theme. There were guys in my age group. Don knows Rob Bierman and other people that tried to actually figure out how to buy the camp and resurrect the camp. That's how strong the traditions were. Just one more thing, just in the terms of history, and this predates all of us, but everyone used to take a train before we started flying people to Boston, taking a bus. And that was a huge bonding experience. They would start a train in St. Louis, they'd add a car in Cincinnati, and then they'd bring it to Washington, D.C. and add a car. And by the time you got to Philly and New York and Boston, you had a train full of crazy guys who were young guys who were fired up and ready for the summer. I sort of wish that we had some of that experience. Basically one morning we were in our hometowns, and then that night we're having dinner in North Belgrade, Maine.
Right. So when you would go back right after your camper days and you became a counselor, were you an uncle right away, or you had to earn that later on in your?
There was a transition year, I would suppose I'd call it. We said it was a waiter year. A lot of guys did waiters. Other people did odd jobs. Someone served as the post office clerk or something. I did a lot of back office stuff. So it was sort of a transition year. Don, I don't remember. I don't think we were called uncle that year.
Transition. You were waiters. You weren't uncles. If you were the office boy, you were not an uncle.
No,
But
and
once you were a counselor, and you either were in a bunk or had a tent or whatever, you were an uncle.
Right.
I also remember
we didn't have CITs.
No,
Right.
we never had CITs. No,
I
you
remember
were.
my other memory of being there for lunch that I had never seen before is that when your pitcher ran out of water, you didn't get up and get water. You held your pitcher up and somebody came and they're like, do you guys remember that? I mean, you lived it. I was there for one lunch. I'm like, what is this? Everyone's holding a pitcher up.
That kind of went by the board once it got a little more expensive. They cut down the wait staff, so we ended up waiting our own tables. But yeah,
I remember having waiters.
oh yeah, but there weren't as many. We had one waiter for 3 tables. Dan and I.
I mean, they brought out. I mean,
they
we used to, well, that's true. We used to have
everything.
to go up, and they would have
Nope.
the trays ready, and we would
Right.
we
Yep.
lined up, but we did put up the pitcher to get the
Right.
budget.
But we had initially, when Dan and I were there, we had one waiter, had 3 tables, and we didn't get up for anything. Everything was brought to us. So
So
Yeah,
I'm going to
soft
ask you each to tell an appropriate story or a prank, okay, that you remember and see which one of you can get the others to get that look on their face, like, oh yeah, I remember that one, or I remember that story. Who's up first?
well, I'll save mine. I know what Dan's going to say. I can almost guarantee it. So we'll let him go first.
Well, I'm not sure I'm going to tell the one you think I'm going to tell. There,
Oh,
Uncle
the
Don.
jukebox?
Well,
But-
Are you going to tell the one about the jukebox?
No, I'm not. I think I'm not going to do that. I'll leave that one to you to tell.
No, I wasn't involved.
Because we perpetrate, but we talked about competition before, and David, you talked about competing, and we had a very snarky tennis head of tennis department who was actually a wonderful guy, and Don knows him, Cy
Oh, yeah.
Dunkley.
Yeah.
And he was so compulsed about having this amazing Kennebec Invitational every year. And the youngest guys in senior camp would clear out and live on the baseball field so that the visiting camps could have their cabins. And we had Takaho and Androscoggin came over, and Wigwam and Cobbessy.
Yep.
So they were all invited. And Uncle Cy would be out there the night before the invitation, rolling the courts, the clay courts, and brushing them and getting them ready and putting chemicals on, whatever he had to do. And one of my close friends decided that now would be the time to go across the street and put a quarter or a dime in a payphone. And he called up the officer of the day's cabin, who answered the phone, and this is what he said. This is Mort Goldman from Camp Takahoe. And unfortunately, we're not going to be able to be there tomorrow. So my sincerest apologies. And that set off a whole scramble in the middle of the night. Uncle Si had to get everyone up and man the phones. And they solved the problem, but that was sort of one of the many, many, many pranks. So that wasn't the one you thought I was going to tell, was it, Uncle Don?
No, I thought you'd talk about the jukebox.
I appreciate you talking about Morty Golden because he was my mentor. So very cool. Very cool that you brought that one up. Good job. All right, Don, what do you got?
As a counselor, I'm going to quote a movie quote. I'm innocent of anything. And I always was. And so was Dan. We would go into town at night as a counselors. We had a very nice schedule where we only had to stay in camp one night out of 4s. So I'm back at my tent at 2 a.m. I hear some tools being dropped. So I go over to see what it is, and I won't name his name, but the guy goes, "Hey, Donnie, I'm stealing all the toilet seats from camp." So I said, "Well, I'm not going to help you, but I want to watch." So he took every toilet seat in the entire camp and then hid them. Well, next morning, of course, everybody gets up. Oh my God, pandemonium. One of the older counselors freaked out because he had a morning ritual. In the uncle's cabin, we had a photographer who had hung a toilet seat with the director and the headmaster's photo in it. So this counselor took that toilet seat to the council's meeting and he said, "I'm renting this out. Anybody that needs it. You can use a photo or take it out. It's up to you." So the guy that stole the toilet seats is walking around with a maintenance man and another guy helping him look. They couldn't find him anywhere. So I saw him at 10 a.m. What are you going to do? I got to go to the store and call. So he calls the office and he says in a very nondescript voice, tells them where they are. Well, the guy couldn't understand it. So at 1 o'clock, which is lunch, nobody's got a toilet seat. And I don't know why maintenance didn't go in town and buy, 30 toilet seats, which would have been the smartest thing. So anyway, he goes over to the office and leaves a note and they find the toilet seats and they put them back. But it was probably the best prank I ever saw.
Did he ever come clean that summer?
Not to my knowledge. The funniest part was the guy with the toilet seat in the uncle's meeting. It's just absolutely hilarious.
I didn't remember that part.
And the headmaster walks out of the meeting and he looks at me, he goes, "Donnie, we need those toilet seats back." And I swear to God, I didn't take them. I was being truthful. It was hilarious.
Grabbing all the toilet seats in the middle of the night was not going into different bunks.
No, it was just
the thing about senior camp.
Good point, Andy.
About being rustic.
Yeah,
there were no toilets.
Nope.
There was no electricity in the cabins for the youngest group, which is called the Pioneers. The next 2 years you slept in platform tents. So you had to go, we called it the HOL, which was a massive outhouse with maybe 20 turlets,
14.
as someone call it.
There were 14.
So the guy must have gone from stall to stall to get that. And this is, again, I think this is part of what made Kennebec sort of, they wanted you to come back. So your last year, you lived in the hotel, and that had toilets and sinks and
Had 4
electricity.
toilets. There were 4 of them.
I didn't count them, and 2 showers. So you didn't have to go to the shower house. You didn't have to go to we had a thing called the Triple P, which it stood for the Pioneer Piss Pot. And the HOL, House of Lords, and that's where you.
That's running water. Those were not real outhouse running water in those. The toilets were, yeah.
Yes.
House of Lords, because everyone was on the throne.
Yeah.
Andrew, you got a story you want to tell?
There was a tradition, at least by my time, of different type. A prank that was fairly common. You would at its greatest thing, you would try to see if you could, pick up the cot that a counselor was sleeping on and maybe see if you can get them out into what we called the quad, and you'd wake up in the morning and there'd be some drunken counselor out in the but that usually didn't work out well, so it was often just a deep sleeping camper. But in my first section, one of the traditions was to, I don't know if this is, I guess we call this a raid as opposed to a prank, but
Yeah.
you would in the middle of the night, you'd canoe across to junior camp, and you'd grab all of the bathing suits from the changing hut, and you'd grab all of we had these paddles in what we call the wigwam that had the names of all the kids who were in the winning war canoe that year, and there was another one for they would paddle. So you'd grab them all up and you bring them over to senior camp. And when we pulled back in, we had Bill Harvey, who was the head of trips, and he was probably the toughest dude you had ever come across. He was a wrestling counselor, coach at Duke University, and he caught us at the very end of this. We were a large group, 48, had us down at the waterfront, and I'll never forget him yelling at this one guy, "I ain't no Mickey Mouse," and everyone was. So that was a prank that didn't. It went well until the very end, but we didn't care at that point. We had successfully, brought everything back over. We played a prank against a counselor. And if he watches this podcast, he'll know who he is. We took all of his stuff. He was out of his cabin. He was back at the colony, and there was a swim dock out there, and we recreated his bunk area on the swim dock outside of his house, and he came back the next morning not too happy with us.
Andrew, if David, it's okay, because Andrew knows Bill Harvey. I'd like to humor him with a couple of stories you may not know about Bill Harvey. But as you said, he was one of the toughest guys. He was a wrestling coach, and we always used to bet. There was I think it was called the Kennebec race. This was in senior camp, and it was done on July 4th. And the counselors used to put in some money and bet on it. So I come up and estimate 3 minutes and 10 seconds. And of course, the counselor, Bill Harvey, was right behind me, and he said 3 minutes and 11 seconds. And the counselor after that, the other said 3 minutes and 9 seconds. It's the only time I ever beat Bill Harvey in anything, because it came in at 3:10.4, and I actually won the pool that year. But I think the more interesting story is, Andrew, Bill, I think, was he the swimming coach when you were there, or the head of swimming?
Yes and no. He was, by my time, he was only, Don's father had, I guess, retired.
Right.
So Bill took over as master of the trips. But yes, he did watch the waterfront, but we had someone else who was the head of waterfront. He was a former Uncle Gene came back. He was
Uncle Gene Groff.
Yeah.
Well, Bill was he ran a tight ship down at the waterfront. He had to have his hands, and more than his hands, his body and everything. One morning, Bill came up. He had a big piece of adhesive tape over his left breast because I think a trout attacked his nipple, and he never lived that down with the other uncles, for sure. So, just so you get a good piece of trivia on Bill Harvey.
There you go. Do you guys know of the most famous, any famous alumni?
There's quite a few, actually. The senator from Connecticut, Blumenthal, is that
Richard Blumenthal?
okay?
The owner of the Philadelphia Eagles, Jeff Lurie.
Jeff Lurie
was a year in front of me.
We had the two
Jeffrey Katzenberg, who made films with Steven Spielberg and David and
Disney.
DreamWorks.
Yep.
And Disney. Mhm.
We
and
had
Sam Bronfman.
The Star Trek producer.
No.
And also Dick Fuld, who at one point was the CEO of Lehman Brothers, as it folded.
Danny, you had Shenson.
Richard Shenson was in
Yes.
my group. His father was a producer of the Beatles movie, so we got to see that. We get our own private showing of Hard Day's Night one year and Help the next night, or the
The
next
next
year.
year, yeah, that was great.
And the Notorious, this person did not. There's two other people that worked at Kennebec that never were campers there. One worked in the office one summer, Elliot Spitzer,
Spitzer.
All right.
Mm.
and the other is
He was a waiter as well, I believe.
oh, he,
No,
he may have
He
been.
may have been. I think he was just the office, though.
And the
1
other,
year.
and the other that people don't know, it's not a household name, is Ken Ehrlich, who has been an Emmy Award winner, Grammy Award winner. I think, no, a Grammy Award winner. He's Celine Dion's producer, and he wrote First Section Men. He wrote half a dozen songs when he worked at Kennebec that were still, some of which and Andrew and Don and I were going back and forth, some of which survived till the very end. And he was there before me, so he was there in the 60s.
Yeah.
And some
Well,
of
there's
the-
Adam Goldstein, who was president of Royal Caribbean. He may still be.
No, he retired a couple of years ago.
Oh, he
He
did?
was a former
Okay.
COO of Royal Caribbean, and
Yeah. Did a
That's
nice
that's
job.
that's quite a list. Quite a
Yeah, it
list.
really
There's
is.
more.
So when you guys were when you were in senior camp, even boys camps would have something that was a non-sport. Most boys camps would have something that was non-sports related. Belgrade had Songfest. It was done during visiting day. And did you guys have anything that was not sports related that went to the point total for your color war?
Well, we had a play. You had to do the play. For the Cold War, I think that might be the only non-sports related. We had a song fest when you came back from your trip. Every trip had to have a song that they performed, but that was not for points.
That wasn't for points.
But one of the biggest point producers for Cold War was the play,
Wow.
and it was a very big deal. And
Two separate plays.
yeah, one for
Yes.
maroon, one for gray.
And then there was a judging panel.
Yes, so usually
yes.
the nurses who are the aunts. They were them, and Mrs. Fox would come. That was a big deal.
and they had the best actor, and then they gave an award for the best play.
For the
as
best
well.
play.
So you could get like, I think it was 30 points for the play and 5 points for best actor and 5 points for best sets.
Silly
Wow.
question. Were these musicals or were they dramas or
No,
comedies?
these are typically plays.
Wow. So you had to learn your lines and you were being judged on your acting ability.
Yes, and so that was a big point producer. And you started from the first day, and the plays were they were the week before visiting day, I think, because visiting day was the first section show.
Correct.
And what was the
Very
culminating?
next
did
day
you have
started the trip season.
So was there a culminating kind of event, all camp capture the flag, or was there something that ended it that was big?
So we had an obstacle race, much like the one that we did at the Corey Olympics at
Right,
Starlight.
a whacked up
on Labor Day weekend.
relay or an Apache relay, as they would call it.
Everyone had to participate. Every Maroon had to do something in the
Right.
Maroons race,
On the gray.
and you would have these meetings building up to the obstacle race, and everyone would stand up. The Maroons would meet in the mess hall, and the Grays would meet in the assembly hall, and everyone would stand up one after the other and yell the whole. It was so ingrained in you. The three of us could probably do it today, right? Make a bed, cabin beat a tennis court,
Tennis
hit
court.
the tennis court to basketball to rifle range, and
Rifle
then whoever was shooting the rifle would stand up and say, "Okay, I shoot a possible," which was 100, and then the next thing, hey, shoot a possible.
Rifle range to horseshoes.
Go to the horseshoes, right?
Horseshoes, and then this is something that changed, to be kinder. So there was a runner who had to take the baton. So that runner didn't necessarily participate in the next event. So the horseshoe pit, the volleyball, was literally 6 feet. And so up through my first year, I think they used to pick the worst athlete or whatever, or whoever it was would do horseshoe to volleyball pit. And then I think my second year, the color captain changed it to be that, it'll be like the color captain to do that, because it was sort of considered demeaning.
But it created a lot of strange occurrences, because one of the events was like a 4 or 5 second handstand.
Yes,
And typically
and
only
a cracker whistle.
Yeah, and you had to whistle "God Bless America" with crackers in your mouth. In there, and so I think a couple years you had to use your best athlete, because that's the only person that could do like a 4-second handstand. So you had to squander your best athlete on the handstand, and then you had to.
You were allowed to do up to 2 events, I believe.
Oh, we never had that. I think it was one and only.
We were one event only.
Everyone had to do
Everybody-
one, but if you
No,
because there may be more spots,
Yeah.
Yeah, we didn't have that. And, it went from like you had water boiling, you had canoeing,
Canoeing across the lake and back.
Across
to
the
get a
lake and
can of
back.
sand.
dry
Bring a can
sand.
of sand back from
and then
Sailing,
the
it
last,
ended
the
with
finishing
sailing.
was sail to victory, as they said.
Yeah, and
Yep.
generally there was no win for the sailing part. I mean,
Right.
that's how it went. It's the end of the year. You have this big thing, and then everyone's sitting around watching these boats go, 1/10 of a mile an hour for the last hour. It was really
And
excruciating.
some years it did come down to what we called an obstacle race year. 2 of my 4 years. were.
Often,
Yeah.
it often did.
Okay. Best memory. Single best memory. Andrew,
Ooh.
give the other guys a little time. to think.
Okay, you may not like this one as a Takaho man, but I think it was the summer of 1980, and Takaho came for their day of sports, and right before lunch was the basketball game, and I guess everything just finished. And in my 4 years there, I only saw this once. Literally everybody surrounded this little clay basketball court that we had there, going wild and chanting, "We hate Takaho, we hate Takaho." And that was a year we had a really good basketball team, and we won. And people were going nuts. And I mean, it must have been just crazy insane to be a player in that game. I mean, more heckling and razzing than you would get at Madison Square Garden. I think that was one of my favorite memories. But we would be remiss if not talking about going on the Allagash. I think for anyone who went through Kennebec the whole way, in your last year, and you do this 18-day trip that starts with I don't know, was it 7 days at this special camp, the 3rd camp for Kennebec called Chisuncook,
Just uncooked.
which was up there and before the Allagash Water. We trained for a week there. That was an incredible bonding experience. It's your last year. You're in the last 3 weeks of being a camper, and then you go on the Allagash Waterway and you finish up at Fort Kent in Canada. An amazing experience, and that's what I meant by they build you up and they build these skills, and then every skill that you learned comes together when you take that Allagash trip, and you never forget it. And David, I don't know if you remember when I was at the obstacle race for the Corey Olympics at Starlight, and do you remember when the canoe spilled over?
Capsize, yeah.
And remember what I did?
You righted it.
I was not, I told Scott Schwaber that I'm a pretty good canoeist. And no, I got somebody for that. And we're all on the beach there, and they go out and they capsize within like 15 yards of the dock. And I just jump up and I grab the canoe and I go out there and I get them righted, pretty quickly. I come back out and I remember Allison comes up, "What the hell did you just do?" I said, "That's a cross canoe rescue." You've never seen that before. And but that was just ingrained in us. I never thought all those years later I would still be able to do it, let alone remember it.
That's awesome.
But that's kind
Don,
I'm gonna let Dan go first. I do have a question.
you
Do
did that
want it-
last. You did that last
All
time.
right. Do you want best memory as a camper or a counselor?
Whatever you want to share.
Am I allowed to brag?
Uh-huh.
Oh boy. All right. 3rd year, I decided I was going to do well in riflery, and I went all the way up through the medals and the bars. And the last assembly, I was awarded an an NRA medal for National Rifleman of the Year. And I think it was probably affiliated with all the camps. I mean, but it was an NRA medal. And I was kind of stunned, and it was like, I didn't do anything, but it just kind of hung with me that, you know, that was a neat thing. So
Nice individual accomplishment that you had at
it
camp
was.
and recognized by the camp.
Yeah. Well, it was a national award. You know, I still have it. I can't find my bars though. Dan, do you have yours?
My
Your
bars?
riflery bars. Yeah, Dan was an excellent.
Yeah, I do.
rifleman.
I made it, I think, through the kneeling. I didn't get the standings, which were bar 8 and 9, but I went through
Yeah, that's what
bar
I did.
7. But I always, everyone, I mean,
There it is.
my fondest, oh, there you go. One of
I
my,
made that.
you know,
Dan?
it's really hard to single out something, David. I think it was because it was just, I look forward to going to camp months in advance. Every summer I would count the days down before I left and went to camp. And I don't know why this particular memory comes out, but I worked to help produce the first section show as one of the nerds on the stage crew. So the oldest guys did the first section show, in the 3 years up to that, I worked on it. But the highlight of that is after the first section show, the first section and everyone that helped them got to go to the mess hall after everyone else went to sleep and have pizza. And that was a big deal. You know, it was sort of a team effort, a job well done. You didn't have to be the fastest runner or anything to do it. And it was just felt special. So that was crazy. I'm not sure what it was as a counselor there. It was just so, to me, it's the personal relationships. I don't know how you can quantify any moment of that, but my best friends are campers and counselors in life are from Camp Kennebec. Every year I go up, and as Don knows, I have friends scattered all over the state of Maine. And you know, Philly, when I went to Austin, Texas, we just snowbirded for the first time this year. And on the way down, we stopped in Jacksonville, and I saw Kennebecker, who was in my group. I hadn't seen him in 35 years. And then we were down in South Florida, and I had lunch with 2 Kennebeckers. And I'll be in Atlanta in a couple of weeks, and I'll see a Kennebecker who I went with. So it's this network, this powerful network of campers and counselors from all walks of life that have just bonded together. And I don't know how you encapsulate that in a single memory, but that to me is the power. And in some ways, I want my granddaughters to experience that. But as we were talking at the very beginning, the camping landscape has changed so much. It's going to be a real challenge to try and see if we can even get them interested and find that kind of experience. But I'd love for them to make lifelong friends like I did.
We can chat about that offline, because
I was about to say, I can talk
gentlemen,
to you about that too.
it exists, and
does.
Great.
and we're doing it, and in 2023, kids need camp more than ever. Trust me on that. They really.
Well, I
really do.
think camps have always served a purpose. And Kennebec, you know, bring you back to why you're doing this. You know, it had its role, it had its niche. It wasn't for everybody. Although I think it was. I think, you know, when you actually get into the game, we talk about the competitiveness, but there were so many kids who were not great athletes, who just, you know, I can think of 2 that came back, you know, for 7 years. They were there, and they had such great times, whether it was sailing or playing, you know, or doing the play and just different things. And you know, we were, you know, for the most part, everyone was really nice. I mean, certainly there was a little razzing and you know, maybe I'll use the word hazing, although, you know,
Yeah.
of that, but I wouldn't call it bullying, you know, although maybe some people now might, but I think, you know, and I'm thinking of one very close friend of mine, you know, who talked about how, you know, it made him grow as a person and help him into manhood, you know, when, you know, he barked back at somebody finally, you know, but, you know, it's part of the experience, getting, and this is any camp, you're saying, you can't, you we absolutely did not have the best facilities. But we had.
It was the best to you.
What's that?
It was the best for you. And that's, and the memories are, I mean,
The memories
did-
are just as strong.
we just spent an hour talking, and we could go for another hour, because that's what camp does. And that's what a camp like Kennebec does. And that's why we want to do this podcast. So of course, we're going to end with this. Was there a camp alma mater?
I
It
mean,
was
a
a
song.
camp song. Yeah.
Yes, of course.
Oh, geez,
All
I'm
right,
not singing.
gentlemen, ready? On
No.
3.
You're gonna
1,
do it. Come on, Donnie. This is not.
1, 2, 3, go.
Money, loyal
campers. Now
listen to what we say. Lift up
Your
your
hearts and voices for the
The old maroon and gray. For
For
other
other
camps
camps have colors, and
They
they
are
are
good ones too. But they will
quickly
fade
fade
away.
With
them
we
we
are
are
through.
That's enough.
Hurrah,
Hurrah for Camp
Kennebec.
Kennebec. Hurrah for the maroon and the gray, and maroon, as we would say.
And the
Hurrah,
graves.
And the gray.
Hurrah,
Wait, we got one here
hurrah.
too.
Hurrah,
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 hurrah for the maroon and the gray.
You don't want any more.
Guys,
Then
thank
we
you.
had a cheer that at senior camp we would do after that.
All right, let's
It
go.
was, it
No,
was,
no,
it was
For
sort
the
of
Teak
the,
boys
it was
fighting
a-
to win.
No, no.
He is the
Here's the
corker
corker with lots of them. Cobbessy were surely
fighting to
when
win.
we really
Fighting for Kennebec,
back,
rah,
rah,
rah.
rah.
Here
Here
comes
comes
our
our
nine,
9,
leading the line. We will fight to conquer them. So let's give a big long cheer for our Kennebec, rah, rah.
rah.
Camp
Camp
that
that
beats
beats
them all. Play
Play
some more and raise the score for our
Kennebec.
Kennebec, rah, rah. I have a
David,
confession to make.
before we get off, leave the call. This is, this is kind of really impactful to me, but should we do a Rip Raw Rex? And the reason I'm saying that is because a Rip Raw Rex is a cheer you gave to the other team
The other team.
before you gave it to yourself after a sporting event. But it is showing up at funerals of counselors who worked at Kennebec for many years. And in a church recently, a Rip Raw Rex was given for actually twice. One I watched by Zoom and one I heard about. And these are counselors that were there for 30 or 40 years. And you have a Rip Raw Rex in a Christian church. It's quite amazing.
Let's do it for the memory of Camp Kennebec on 3.
Well, we should do it to thank David, I think.
Yeah, let's thank
Let's
let's do
thank
one for
David.
David. Ready?
Absolutely.
1, 2, 3. Rip Raw
Rip Raw
Rex.
Rex, Rip
Rip
Raw
Raw
Rex,
Rex.
hoorah, hoorah,
Hoorah,
Camp
Camp
Kennebec.
Kennebec.
David,
Yeah.
Thank you guys very much. I want to thank our audience for joining us. You can find this podcast and many more episodes on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and anywhere else that you like to listen to podcasts. Thank you guys, Andrew and Don and Dan from Camp Kennebec for joining us on this podcast tonight.
Take a moment to shine.